So, why do Star Wars movies keep getting canceled? Um, I know that there hasn't been a currently recent announcement of one getting canceled, but it is something I want to address, kind of as a way to point out certain leadership issues. And that's kind of my answer, is I think it's leadership issues. A single project being canceled, sure, that could be the director. But when you have as many as Star Wars is consistently having, there's something higher up going on. At that point, you can't blame directors or actors. At that point, you have to start looking at the studio execs and say, hey, why can't you get this across the finish line? Sure, if one director was a problem, just replace him, get a new one. Why can't you do this for seemingly any of your movies? So, what I think we're seeing here is that the long term planning team's ability to view, plan out, and schedule things in the future has hit its limits. Um, and that's, like I said, that's an executive problem. That isn't something one director will do. That is something that the director's directors will be doing, where they're trying to plan out 10 years from now, how is this going to work? And they've hit their limit for creative capability. So, in particular, I think this is a specifically Kathleen Kennedy centric issue, though it may not be her exclusively. She likely has a team working with her, so there may be other people involved that are also throwing wrenches in the works, but I do think Kennedy is kind of the center of this problem. And that should be displayed pretty well on the cancellation of the Rogue Squadron movie, where, at least as far as I've heard, they're only rumors, but from what I've heard, it was Patty Jenkins didn't get along with Kathleen Kennedy's vision of the future, which is something that seems to be happening a lot, in my opinion. If you remember way back in Episode 9's development, we eventually learned out that I think there was 3 versions of the script, and that shows that, effectively speaking, the directors would have one vision and then would be able to get some time going into it. They would start the development process, and then after showing some stuff off, would get canned. And due to various reasons, I think one of them was personal, but not super relevant, honestly. It's that they kept getting canned is kind of the big issue. So, what does this bring us down to? Well, Kathleen Kennedy needs to stop trying to manhandle every single little detail. You have to understand that things will not always go your way. And if you want certain things to not happen, you need to write a playbook for the directors. Personally, one of my playbooks would be no galaxy-spanning superweapons. I know the fans of Legends are going to immediately, but the galaxy gun to me. And my response is, the galaxy gun ruins 90% of combat. As soon as you can build one, everyone builds one, nobody shoots at each other, and you get the Cold War over nukes all over again. That's bad for storytelling. Well, okay, you can do storytelling, you get a bunch of spy stories out of that, but it's not great for fleet actions, and it's really difficult to undo the galaxy gun. It's kind of, world-breaking, franchise-breaking, so it's one of those you just say, don't do this thing. If you want to blow up a planet, you have to get over the planet. I'll let you decide how you want to blow up the planet. If that's what you want to do, that's what you get to do. But you have to be over the planet to do it, or at least in system. So, I don't think Kathleen Kennedy is able to do that. I don't think she's able to write down what are the things that will get your project canceled onto a piece of paper, hand it to a director and say, hey, this is the stuff you must avoid, and everything else we can work around. Because if you could do that, if you could hand that to directors, they would work with you. They would look at it and they go, all right, well, I know ahead of time that I can't build the galaxy gun. No matter how much I may love the galaxy gun, I have to plead with you directly before I implement it, because if I don't, then I'm just going to get canned in the first place. And that's how you would expand this kind of a project out further. You're not going to be able to take Star Wars into higher territory if you're not sitting there and telling your directors what's going on beforehand. And finally, what that brings me to is kind of the overall movement of what it kind of feels to me is happening with the executives for Star Wars, and that's that they're very reactive. They aren't typically proactive. They're doing a bunch of reactions, which is something happens and then they decide based upon that, as opposed to going up and saying, okay, we know this is going to happen. We've got, Mandalorian's going to have not actually, in one starfighter, and we're going to want to plan out a bunch of fighter battles for that. And since we know he's going to keep that in one throughout Season 3, we want to open Season 4 with a starfighter battle. But you know this at the beginning of Season 1, or not Season 1, at the beginning of Season 3. So you can plan the opening for Season 4 at the opening of Season 3 just because you know what Mando's going to have as his equipment at the end of Season 3. And unless something really radical does come along that forces you to react to it, you can plan into the future. And that needs to happen to be able to have multiple movies a year. And that brings me all the way back to the movie cancellations. What we're looking at right now for a deployment schedules for movies is potentially one every 2 years. Now, despite Kathleen Kennedy's history of announcing and canceling things, I think we'll get 2 of those. At least. And they'll probably be on the same rough schedule, so once every 2 years. That is, on the development cycle for movies, from what I understand, the typical actual filming cycle. And that's where I think it ends up at. Is I think that's Kathleen Kennedy's capacity to oversee movies. Is I think she can only really oversee one production cycle at a time in the movie department. And that's just her capacity. So unless she's able to delegate that off and remove that responsibility from her plate, which would require trust that I don't think she has, but if she can develop that, if she can, move along with that, then we could see more movies. But I don't see that happening. So I don't think we're going to get more movies than that, regardless of how many would get announced, because I don't think Kennedy's able to oversee movies at that level, if that makes sense. So, in conclusion, Star Wars movies keep getting canceled because the executives and the producers at Star Wars all have to adhere to one person's schedule, Kathleen Kennedy's. And her ability to oversee this stuff just isn't up to what it needs to be. She isn't performing at the level needed to have more movies or to have more active TV shows. It's just, that's beyond her capability, is what it seems to me. So, here's hoping we get a director at some point, or a CEO at some point, that is capable of delegation.